Good morning, biology students. We're looking at animal life today. We've looked at a little bit of introduction to all living things on Earth, and now we're going to be looking into more specific areas here. So, today we're going to be looking at an introduction to animals altogether, and then the phyla Porifera and Cnidaria. If you'd like to look in your book, chapter 23, sections 1 through 3 is where you'll find the content about these subjects. There are 2 required videos. As you take your notes for the chapter, Mr. Paul and I will ask that you include information from these videos in your notes. You don't have to go through item by item and have a really detailed record of everything in there, but we just want you to give a couple of things that let us know that yes, you've watched these. And I think they'll be enjoyable. I don't think that they'll be dragging you down too badly to watch those. And your homework is to complete your notes. As a reminder, your notes should be handwritten, either digitally or on paper. And then if you submit them as photos, then please paste those photos into a Google document. So there's one document that has all the pages of your notes in it. Okay, so that will be due on Friday. And you can look at your Google Classroom assignment to see more details if you're wondering what exactly the requirements are on your notes. All right, let's get into it. So, animals are the most physically diverse kingdom of organisms. Lots of different ways that animals are diverse. One, if you think about the size of these animals, we have from the blue whales over here that are 25 meters long as adults. So if you took 2 of those and set them on the ICS soccer field end to end, they would pretty well go from one goal to the other. So huge organisms here. And then if we look over here at the rotifers, these are microscopic. You need a microscope to be able to see them. Many things in between. They also are diverse in the habitats where we find them. Some live underwater, some live in saltwater, freshwater, on land, in forests, in grasslands, just a huge amount of diversity. And in the things that they eat. So, how do we classify all these animals? When we're looking at classification, another thing we might ask is animals as a classification, as a kingdom, is that going to stay like that forever? Are we always going to have animals as one big class? Maybe not. There might come a day when we say, okay, these are just too different from one another. Let's make up some more divisions to this class. All right, and all animals share some common characteristics, and we've talked about these characteristics in the first class that we had together this week. So let's take a look at some of those. All animals have eukaryotic cells. They're eukaryotes, not prokaryotes. So they are in the domain eukaryota. All animals are multicellular. They have more than one cell, right? All animals are heterotrophs. They have to eat something in order to survive. They don't make their own food like the autotrophs do. Animals are usually motile. Usually, one of the things that we look at when we're trying to decide if something's an animal or not is, does it move around? There are exceptions to this, and we'll see some of those today. And animals usually reproduce sexually. we have some examples of animals that can also reproduce asexually, but the normal way to reproduce for animals is sexual reproduction. Last one that we'll look at here, animal cells are supported by collagen. So collagen is a three-stranded protein that is strong and flexible. So a lot of times we'll think of fingernails when we think of collagen. Uh, if we look at other kingdoms, do they also have collagen? Well, the plants primarily have cellulose as the support of those cells. In fungi, it's a material called chitin, but in animals, it's usually collagen here. So, as we look at the classification of animals, there are 9 major phyla that we'll be looking at. Altogether, there's actually 36 recognized phyla today, but these 9 phyla that we'll look at contain the vast majority of animals on Earth. There are only very few that don't fit in here. So, how do we break up this kingdom Animalia into phyla? Well, we look at some of the characteristics of these animals. One of those characteristics, does it have tissues or no tissues? Second thing we might look at is what kind of symmetry do these animals have? Radial, that is to say, you could cut it through the middle in any direction, and both sides would look like mirror images of each other. Or bilateral symmetry, where there's only one plane that you can cut, where the two sides would look like mirror images of each other. So if you think of a human, if you cut us down the middle and look at the right side and the left side, we're basically mirror images of each other. So we would have bilateral symmetry. The other option is we could have some that have no symmetry at all. For the digestive system, we look to see, does the animal have a complete or an incomplete digestive system? Complete meaning that there is an opening where food goes in and an opening where waste comes out that goes all the way through. If it's incomplete, there's only one opening, and so the food coming in and the waste going out has to use that same opening. For the circulatory system, is it an open circulatory system where the blood just flows throughout the body of the organism, or is it a closed circulatory system where the blood is contained in blood vessels? So these characters, plus a few more, make it possible to divide the animal kingdom into 9 major phyla. Okay, when we look at these, we can see some of these divisions. So if we were to look at this, here's how these are arranged in this figure. So we're saying that down here at the bottom, we would have the ancient ancestor of all animals. And at some point, there was a division where some animals, some of the offspring, had no tissues, and then other offspring developed tissues. And then from there, the ones that had tissues, they divided out, and some of them had a radial body plan, and some of them had a bilateral body plan. So the symmetry was different there. And then as we come up, we could look through all these. So we have our 9 major phyla: Porifera, Cnidaria, Platyhelminths, Annelida, Mollusca, Nematoda, Arthropoda, Echidnadermata, and Chordata. All right. So we're going to start with the invertebrates rather than the vertebrates. And what is an invertebrate? Invertebrate's an animal that does not have a backbone. The invertebrates make up 8 of the 9 animal phyla. More than 95% of all animal species are invertebrates, so the vast majority of animals on Earth. And there's still a lot of diversity between these invertebrates. The first phylum that we'll look at is the phylum Porifera. If you had seen the videos already, the first video is about the Porifera, some general characteristics of those. They are sessile for most of their lifetime. So they have a short part of their life cycle at the beginning where they can float through the water, but then once they find a good spot to live, they anchor themselves there, and that's where they stay for the rest of their life. Sponges are filter feeders, so many of them are very efficient at filtering food out of the water that goes through them. They have no circulatory system, so they are circulating water to bring them the oxygen and nutrients that they need. And they have no digestive system, so they are absorbing nutrients from these from the water that flows through. They have no symmetry. They are asymmetrical as far as their body plan. And this is the only phylum that has no tissues. They have a few specialized kinds of cells, but they aren't arranged into tissues that function as a group, like we would have heart cells that function together as heart tissue. So a couple of examples of those sponges. If we continue on to the Cnidaria has the jellyfish, coral, anemones as examples. Cnidaria have no circulatory system. They have an incomplete digestive system. So again, they only have one opening. They have radial symmetry, and they're found with 2 body forms. So some of these Cnidaria are in the polyp form. They have like a cylindrical tube, and their mouth and tentacles are facing upward. And that is in contrast here, the top example here, we have a coral. The bottom, we have an anemone. And then the other body form is the medusas. They're umbrella shaped, so they're kind of flipped upside down. And they have a mouth and tentacles on the underside of them. If we look at important structures, we have the mesoglia, which is a translucent gelatinous material. It's not actually cells, but it is a big glob of jelly. That's why they're jellyfish. Again, when you see the gray font on these slides, these are things that you don't need to tell us about when you are doing your assessments. So, composed of water and collagen together. I'm not going to ask you a question about that on the assessments. And this functions as a hydrostatic skeleton. So pressure inside of it allows it to function as a skeleton to give it its structure. Other important structure is the cnidocytes. These are stingers. They're contained in nematocysts. And these are on the tentacles of the jellyfish. but most of these Cnidaria have these stingers. That's where they get their name, the cnidocytes, Cnidaria. If we look at the classes, again, this is in gray. We have the anthozoans. These have a dominant polyp stage. The anemones and the corals. Anthozoans means flower animals, and I think you can see why they might be called that. Coral is very common in the fossil record. If I was here with you in class, I would show you some examples of fossil coral. Because I'm primarily a geology guy, I've got lots of geology examples. Anyhow, this is a coral that I found. When I found it, only a little bit of the top was sticking out of the rock, and then as I scraped and brushed and washed it, I exposed more and more until I could see this coral. And coral is important because it is a good indicator of the environmental conditions that that rock layer was set down in. When we see coral, we say, well, coral, it grows in tropical, shallow ocean environments. And so we say, when this was laid down, that's probably the conditions that were in place when this rock was forming. Another class of cnidarian is the hydrozoans. They alternate between forms, the hydra. So here we've got hydra. These, if you collect pond water or stream water or even water from a pot that you are growing water plants in, many times you can find these. They're microscopic or just above microscopic. Sometimes you can see them if you look real close. Lots of times with a magnifying glass you would be able to see them. And they've got these tentacles that stick out, and they can sting their prey. They are meat eaters. They are stinging prey and bringing it to their mouth. They can reproduce by budding, as you see in the picture here, where another one of these hydra is growing on. And hydrozoans, they alternate between body forms. So they will grow up, and as they develop and they're ready to reproduce, the colony will release small little medusa forms of these hydra that can then produce sperm and egg, and then those will produce the next generation of hydra. The scyphozoans have a dominant medusa form. Our jellyfish would be what we usually think of when we think of scyphozoans. And the cubozoans, the last class that we'll look at here, are the sea wasps and the box jellyfish. Many of these are quite venomous. If you get stung by them, you could die within minutes. There's usually warnings posted if there's a beach where box jellyfish are often found. They will post signs saying whether it's safe to swim in that area or not. And they'll usually say, make sure there's a lifeguard if you're in a place where box jellyfish are sometimes found, so you can be rescued if you're stung. One other interesting thing about this group is that they have fairly complex eyes. They have a retina, a cornea, and a lens so that they can gather pictures of their surroundings, but they have no brain. So when they see, where does that information go to? We don't know. All right. So this is an introduction to some of these. Obviously, we could spend years researching one single kind of animal. People, as they're doing their doctoral work, they do that. But for our class, we're just looking for a brief overview to try to get you to see the diversity that we find between animals. All right. So go ahead and look at the assignments that are in our classroom. And if you have questions, please let Mr. Paul or I know. Thank you.